New York. Jeffrey, if I can begin with you, the Biden administration has been strongly critical of China's actions on human rights, but engaging on climate change. Do you see that as a strategy that can actually work?
I'm not sure why BBC started with listing only China's human rights abuses. What about America's human rights abuses? The Iraq War, together with the UK, completely illegal and under false pretenses. The war in Syria, the war in Libya, the continued sanctions against civilian populations in Venezuela and Iran, walking away from the Paris Climate Agreement for the last 4 years, unilateral trade actions that have been deemed illegal by WTO.
Also talking from the perspective of how Joe Biden himself and those around him have talked about the human rights abuses in China. Just to say,
always, excuse me for one moment, the U.S. always attacks other countries. It holds itself sacrosanct. It's really outrageous, because I know what goes on in American foreign policy, and I know how abusive it is, and I know what it's like to live in a racist society, which I happen.
The OPCW put out a report on the alleged chemical attack. The OPCW put out a report on the alleged chemical attack in Douma, alleging Syrian guilt. But a series of leaks emerged from inside the OPCW, showing that the inspectors on the ground reached a very different conclusion. The so-called chemical attack, which the US, France and UK used as an excuse to bomb Syria, most likely was staged with the help of the White Helmets, a UK-US paid propaganda entity. We need clarity, we need the truth. As Julian Assange says, if wars can be started by lies, peace can be started by the truth.
Where the result of the so-called humanitarian interventionist wars, I mean, what's humanitarian about this? I mean, the narrative about, is that the Syrian government would have committed all of these crimes, but we know that that is not true. Colonel Black said very clearly that the plan to have regime change in Syria was made by the Pentagon about 10 years before the destabilization happened in 2011. And we know what was the policy of regime change for the entire region: Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, Syria, Libya. So the narrative about how this war happened is completely wrong. Let's start with the humanitarian situation. When you have a people about to die and the world is doing absolutely nothing, that means the people who are watching that are morally unfit to survive. And I'm crying out to you and to help us to make a mobilization, because we have to get rid of this Caesars Act, and there has to be an immediate reconstruction of Syria. The so-called Donors Conference, which just took place in Brussels a couple of weeks ago, was a complete charade, because it collected a few billions of dollars, but they will not go to the central government in Syria. They will go to the neighboring countries who have taken refugees. They will go to some opposition groups and NGOs, but they will explicitly not go for the reconstruction of Syria. And what Cardinal Senari has made emphatically clear, he says, without a reconstruction, there is not going to be any end of this misery, because, it's not just giving food and medicine, which is urgent right now. So I really think this, let me just say one last thing on the Caesar Act. This is a lie. This was manufactured photographs showing supposedly the tortures of the Assad regime, but it's for the vast majority, it's pictures of Syrian soldiers who were killed by Al-Qaeda. We have seen these kinds of fabrications again and again. Remember the babies who were supposedly ripped out of the incubator by Saddam Hussein in the first US attack against Iraq. Then we had the so-called yellow cake, which all turned out to be a lie, the so-called weapons of mass destruction, which did not exist. Then we had the lies by the White Helmets about the so-called use of chemical weapons, which was a false flag operation. So this has to stop, and the Caesars Act should be lifted, and all the congressmen who are not lifting it make themselves complicit in every death which is occurring in this region. I really want to put it in these stark terms because, this has reached a point where either the world wakes up and we start to remedy this, or we will not survive because of our own moral failure as a human species.